So the title we had given was a race between mind and machine, because we are seeing a lot of things happening, and we thought we will explore that. Oh, somebody's taken out the, okay. So this particular time is very significant from brain, understanding of brain. A lot of things are happening. One of the things, of course, was there was a Nobel Prize given for brain GPS discovery. And it was just a few months back. But more than that, it's actually the brain research, which was confined to labs and hospitals, has come out of that. And partly because it has become easy to probe brain through very cheap neuro headsets. So I'll talk about that first. Then I will talk about many mega projects being launched across the world. Then I will discuss what are the different ways brain is being modified or tried to be modified. Then we are trying to put brain on computer. At the same time, we are learning from brain and developing computers. Then I'll just throw some points about machine and consciousness. Secretary was talking about it. And I've listed out a few questions to ponder, and then I would end it by my take on the whole thing. So as I said, that probing mind is spread out in labs and hospitals. So what you would typically see in labs and hospitals, something like this. But what you see now in the last 2-3 years is that things like this, things like this, things like this. Even it's a fashionable single electrode neuro headset that can be connected to a mobile phone, and you could monitor various things, or you could monitor a child. For example, I've been myself monitoring children in school and so on. Or using something like this to help somebody in home. There are things like this artistic EEG helmet, which relaxes you. The 3D printed, again, 3D printing coming here. A helmet which responds to the brain waves. It changes the pattern, it changes the shape. There are hackathons being held which discuss about how they actually allow participants to hack the brain. For example, one of the hackathons that was there, in this team, lucid dreaming won, which actually made people dream in the lucid phase. And so they did some technique, they used the REM phase, and they made sure that you go into that. That was the winning team. So what I'm trying to say here is that it is no longer experts who are doing this, but people outside that, large number of people are coming forward. Just like computer, when moved out from labs and so on, started to explode. Same kind of thing is happening here. I got involved in this area mainly to help persons with severe disability. So I'm not a non-expert by any classification. I was only trying to help people. And in that process, I tried to learn a few things. One of the first things that I did was to use brain-computer interface to help this gentleman, Suresh, who was from Ahmedabad, and for 13 years, he had a brainstem stroke in 99. He was the age of 32. He lost his voice, he lost his head, hand movement, and leg movement. Only way he could communicate a blink of his eyes. So in about 2012 March, I gave him this device, neuro headset, and wrote certain programs so that we could capture, you can see the video here. He was only able to, you can see this video where what we have done is we are capturing his head movement. We are mapping that to the mouse movement so that he's able to move the cursor, and we put an on-screen keyboard so he's able to focus on whichever character he wants to do that. And then when he blinks his eyes, you can see that he'll blink his eyes. You'll see when he blinks his eyes, that blink is monitored through the EEG waves, and that is mapped to the mouse click. So effectively, it's like using a mouse, using a head to move the mouse, blinks his eyes, he types that character. The first thing he tried to type was his wife's name, Jayasri, short from Jaya. You can see how they used to communicate. This is how they used to communicate before this. And he used to love to write blogs because he can hear and see, but he didn't have a way to do this. It was a very slow process. After 1 month, we improved the system. And then we also demonstrated how he could actually light a bulb, for example, or operate a TV, for example. So you'll see this video will come to that. So you can see that he's trying to light a bulb with eye blink. So there's a bulb here, he lights it up, and you will see the smile on his face. So that's the kind of change that you can bring into life of people. Then when I gave talk at Dr. Gaurie Devi session, after that many doctors contacted me, and they requested me that can you make some of the people communicate in vegetative state. Okay. Again, I'm not going to go detail. Some of these are from Delhi only. What we've tried to do this is to see if we can capture certain brain patterns in response to certain question we are asking. And through using that, we can get them to say yes and no. Right now, we have not been successful in this, but then I have not put in too much effort also on this. About 3 people have tried. But I believe that should be possible to, if we put in more effort, it should be possible to get them to communicate yes and no. Basically, we look at 3-dimensional brain activity in real time, and we ask them to imagine certain activity and look at the response. Now, coming on to other things, there are things happening like neural bypass. We are bypassing the link between brain and in this case, arm. You're able to move arm by bypassing that link and doing this. Actually, I've seen the video here. He's able to move the fingers. The person with 2 mind-controlled prosthetic arms. There is spinal cord implants which are stretchable, so actually you can eventually be able to replace the spinal cord if it gets injured. And like in the paralyzed rats, they've been able to actually make them walk. This is a thought-driven wheelchair. The monkey is trying it out. Then Samsung, for example, is trying to develop a system by which, using brain waves, you can capture the chance of stroke, early warning for stroke, and then give the warning to the user. Then the wireless brain-computer interface, which is actually streaming your brain waves, and you can actually connect to anything else. As I mentioned, there are many nations are launching mega projects on brain. For example, there is the European Human Brain Project, the Obama Brain Initiative, Australia, China, Japan, and Israel. India has few activities, but we may need to probably go up on higher scale. Most of them are trying to unravel the mystery of brain. And human brain has about 80 to 100 billion neurons. And they're trying to go down to neuron level resolution. So European Human Brain Project is also trying to do that. They've come out with a kind of, just like your Google Earth, they've come out with a map of brain, 3-dimensional map of brain. Recently, we saw also news just a few days back that we are able to capture the moving animals' neural activity, not restrained. Let me come to the modifying mind part. One of the major acceptance by especially the modern science was neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity allows us to, once you accept this, it tells you that it is possible to change the brain. In our Indian philosophy, Eastern philosophy, we have always held this. But earlier, in the modern science, it was felt that brain is a physiologically static organ. Although we have always practiced meditation and so on, and it has been felt that this changes your mind to some extent. So this acceptance of neuroplasticity has changed a lot of things. I, again, was helping children with learning disability. And one of the things that I tried to learn through a scientific work was that if I can measure beta 1 to theta ratio, then, and if it is lower, then the child may have learning disability. So to improve this, I learned the technique of brain wave entrainment or neurofeedback. In addition, when I did this, I found that I can also help adults with various issues like insomnia, depression, and so on. In this particular cases, I have used audio stimulus or binaural beats. But a very interesting discovery recently I saw. Some of you might remember your school days when you were punished for doing something, either performing poorly or something like this. You were asked to do sit-ups by holding your ears. I was surprised. Now it is being called super brain yoga. Super brain yoga. Okay. And people are paying money to attend the session on this. and then I understood that what we thought was punishment was not really punishment. It was a way to improve your brain. So the weaker students were asked to improve their brain by doing this exercise. So now you see that you go to the US and you will see that a lot of people doing this, holding their ear, doing sit-ups. Okay? And so in some sense we had this traditional knowledge, and somewhere we forgot that why we're doing it, and we thought it was an insult. So today if you hold somebody's ear, it becomes a big issue. But actually it was a way to improve your brain. It's a very interesting thing. And actually a lot of people who want to increase their memory intelligence, and in fact it's claimed that can make you a better thinker. The children with autism, learning disability, Down syndrome, and so on, they are experimenting with this. Alzheimer's patients, senior citizens, trying to hold on to their memory, they're also trying this. So look at this simple exercise. You are asked to now do 3 to 5 minutes of that sit-up, holding your ears like this in the opposite side, and at a particular lobe you do this. And of course, this has been further developed and experimented, and So I just wanted to show that a lot of traditional knowledge, what we thought was bullshit, was actually had something. Other thing that is I wanted to mention was that monitoring of mind has become easy now. And there's a lot of traditional knowledge that we have. If we can monitor those and actually use modern scientific tools to understand the traditional knowledge, it can become much more acceptable and larger thing. And many of these relate to improvement of mind. So today with the kind of tools that we have, it is very easy to do that. And if we can actually monitor the brain as activities being done live, then you can get very authentic information. So normally, you do it before and after, but actually now we can do it as we are doing the activity. And Buddhist tradition is very strong in some of this. And as I was talking to Geshe Law, actually what he told me that many studies are going on, but it's very important to actually carry out on large scale such exercise so that it can serve humanity in a much larger way. In fact, one thing that I've been trying to do is that you might be familiar with Sirodhara, the Panchkram that is done in Ayurveda. I'm trying to see that the claim is that it improves the pineal gland, activates the pineal gland. I'm trying to see that while this is being done, can I monitor the mind and see whether there are changes taking place? So I could do it before and after, but that's not as conclusive as doing it live as going on. And then we can see the changes happening. Then it's actually perfect. So we're trying to do this to make sure that the process remains authentic and the instrument keeps functioning as well. Another study I saw which said that wandering mind is not a happy mind. This is something that has been thought for a long time. I came across a book which says the Be Here Now, and they actually all talk about this and a lot of practice that we have done. Now it's being realized that this is what Harvard research has shown this. The other way that modifying brain is being, or mind is being tried, I should say brain in this case, supplements. For example, we have used Brahmi for a long time. Nobody objects to this. But now you have cognition-enhancing drugs. These drugs kind of improve your alertness, your focus, concentration for a short time. And some of the universities, I've seen a UK university survey, 25% of students using it. And slowly, just like a sports, a lot of people started drug. Now this is happening in this case. Now what should we do? Is it okay to accept it, or do we need to do something more on it? And the costs are not very high, so actually it's available to anybody who wants it. You can buy it online. Other interesting news that I came across, the scientist from MIT said that if the way things continue, by 2025, half the US children will be autistic. And she claims that it's linked to a particular weed killer. And the reason she says that it is considered, according to the company, I'll not take the company name, but it's considered by a company that's safe for human beings. But actually, the research shows that it's not safe for the gut bacteria. It actually kills the gut bacteria, the beneficial bacteria. So while it's supposed to be beneficial to human being, it kills gut bacteria, and that's leading to a rise in autism. And actually, you can see the graph that she shows. The graph shows that the way that use of that particular chemical has grown up, autism has gone up very significantly. I think it was 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 68 or something like that she's claiming now. So it's a huge, huge growth. So we need to completely, in light of such things, we need to look at our food safety in a very different way. India still has time, but if we don't do it, we'll be following US. Other technique that I wanted to mention was that I learned a naturopathic technique to remove gallbladder stone without surgery.
Dr. Prabhat, Ranjan, somebody wants.
Sorry? Autism, how will you define it?
Autism means the child doesn't interact in a social way. Suppose you start talking, doesn't make eye-to-eye contact, shies away, keeps quiet, likes to be alone, may not be able to take part in activities with the peers, the children, play games. So, that people were not recognizing, the parents or the doctors, but now we find many people are alert to it. And in some of the children, there are genetic abnormalities. Others may be due to toxins, etc. Autism is little isolation, learning disability, social interaction is very less in them. And they're very shy, actually. They withdraw. Sorry?
In your opinion, what should be the role of parents?
The parents have to recognize this very early, which is not easy. Then there are child psychologists, child psychiatrists, who tell them how to take care and give attention to such children. It's a big program by itself. And some medication also can be tried, but generally counseling and how the parents handle the child, that's important.
Well, I was sharing an experience. So I learned a naturopathy technique to remove gallbladder stone. And the lady who is present here, but I will not point out, she suffered severe mental disorder for 15 years. And she was in touch with me, trying to help. So I was helping her with brainwave entrainment. But when I learned this technique of naturopathy to clean my liver and gallbladder and so on, I also requested everybody else. I've been sharing this information to everybody else. And she also went through the exercise. And I didn't expect anything, but she miraculously improved, and her memory and everything came back. She was not able to give exam, but she started to give exams. So in addition to my happiness that she improved, but I had personally really no hope, but I realized that the inner hygiene that we're calling of cleaning of gallbladder, liver, kidney, colon, that is linked to brain, and we need to worry about what I'm calling inner hygiene now as part of our education system. So the food habits, the lifestyle, all of these are very important part of this, so I've been trying to work on this. Another way that brain is being modified is through optogenetics. But actually, through genetic modification, we make the cells in the brain to be receptive to light. And then by putting on and off light, you can actually control the parts of the brain. You can actually implant experiences in the brain and so on. So this is the way actually one is able to modify brain in the rat which is already being tried out. Some of you might recognize this picture, which came PK, the movie, where Amir Khan actually transfers in 6 hours, holding hand, whole language. He learned Bhojpuri. He comes from a planet where there is no speech communication, it's all brain-to-brain communication. And he's able to hold the hand for 6 hours, and the whole Bhojpuri knowledge is transferred to his thing. So Bollywood is not behind. They're also doing for sight. But the other ways that people are thinking, for example, Dr. Nicholas Negroponte, MIT Media Lab, his director, one of the futurists, he said that one day we could learn the language of popping a pill. So it's basically an information pill where so all the pills that we talked about, they're to enhance general capability. Here we are putting information in the brain. Okay. And actually, there are also significant work being done of downloading lessons into brain. So maybe 20, 30 years down the line, we don't have to lecture, we just correct something to brain and the knowledge is transferred. So there are scientific work being done along that line as well. Then other work that is being done is trying to bring brain to computer. So Ray Kurzweil, one of the futurists, well-known futurists, he said that in $1,000, we can get computing power equivalent to mass which is already happened. Human, it will be in about another 10 years, we'll be able to achieve that. That means in $1,000, you get brain power equivalent to human being. And by 2050, he's saying that it will be so much power, it will combine all the human beings on the earth, and it will be equal to your $1,000 computer. You look at the brain of various species, starting with roundworm, which seems to have the minimum 302 neurons and 7,500 synapses, and go to human being, roughly 100 billion, and synapses 100 trillion. This is the kind of range. One experiment, and they've actually put that mind of that worm, roundworm, into a Lego robot of only about 300 neurons. It starts to behave like that roundworm. Okay. And you can see the video actually. So the worm has about 300 neurons and 1,000 cells. Human brain, of course, is very far off. Okay. But one may think that, oh, what do we have in common with worm? Actually, 80% of the genes are same as human beings. Okay. So it's not that we are completely different. So it's only a game. So it's a most basic version of a complex life. So the machine sensors, without any prior programming, made the robot behave in a similar fashion to the worm, approaching and backing up from obstacles or stimulated by food. So is this the beginning of digital immortality? Digital immortality defined where you're able to download your brain into a computer or a robot, and even if your physical body is dead, your brain or the mind remains alive through this. This is called digital immortality. So just like this worm, are we going to be like this one day? Other thing that through the traditional computing, using supercomputers, human brain is being simulated. For example, one of the experiments that was done 1.5 years back, 1 second of brain. This was, of course, not full brain. It was roughly 1 to 2% of neurons. So it's saying that 1.73 billion neurons and connected by 10.4 trillion synapses, roughly 10% of synapses. This was simulated using 83,000 processors. To simulate that 1 second, it took 40 minutes. It used 1 petabyte of memory equivalent to about 250,000 PCs. But the power it used was humongous, 9 megawatt power. Our brain, which is more powerful than this, uses only 20 watt of power. So it looks like that if we continue doing this, less will not be possible. But then look at the next news. Brain-inspired computer. IBM, just a few months back, released this second generation of neurosynaptic computer chip. It has 1 million programmable neurons, one chip, 256 million programmable synapses. It can do 46 billion synaptic operations per second per watt. And running at 5.4 billion transistors at biological real time, it is only consuming 70 milliwatt. So it's compared to that humongous supercomputer taking 9 megawatt, this taking only 70 milliwatt. So at the size of postage stamp, it is expected that it could transform science and technology because, for example, one of the things that we are very good is our vision. We're able to recognize people, images, and so on from various angles, various places. That is not possible right now with computers. It is likely that this kind of technology can make changes. In fact, the gentleman, Dr. Dharman Moda, who is heading this, is from India, and probably one of the IITs, I forget which one. So you can see that the progress for the first generation to second generation in 3 years only, 2011 to 2014, you can see the kind of jump we have. In 3 years, it's 10 to the power 3 orders of magnitude improvement. So if one cannot extrapolate in this, but suppose you're jumping every year 10 times, human brain is not very far off. So IBM targets that they want to go to 10 billion neurons and 100 trillion. So roughly 10% of human brains, they're targeting this. So the issue now is that if we are able to put all the hardware together for machines, can machine become conscious? I have come across 2 sets of believers. One believes that, yes, it is possible. We should be able to upload our mind, our thoughts, memories, our personality to a computer. Okay. And once we have done that, of course, you can copy it, edit it, modify it, sell it, whatever. Okay. Of course, somebody can delete it also. Or something can go wrong with it. So some believe that consciousness is part of the natural world. It depends only on mathematics and logic and what is saying imperfectly known laws of physics, chemistry. But we don't know all the laws, but it follows the natural laws. But the others who believe that it arises from some magical or otherworldly quality, which is not possible. Human beings do not have the capability to bring consciousness into machines. So these are the 2 sets of believers, and one may want to discuss a very important discussion that one can have on this. In addition, DARPA has projects where the memory, additional memory, just like our pen drive, or that's being already developed. So you can actually, if you have less memory, like I have less memory, I can add a little more to mine, and I have additional expanded memory. Okay. So right now, for example, our mobile phones have become our extended body part. Similarly, we might have additional memory that we can buy from market. But very important for scientists like us, the robot scientist who is doing drug discovery better than human scientist. It discovered a malaria drug. And so are we going to be replaced as well? So this is already happening. This robot scientist is doing this. So this leads us to the question that would artificial intelligence end human race? For example, this was a robot Titan. You can see it's walking in a supermarket and all the people are taking pictures here. In fact, Elon Musk, a very famous entrepreneur, I don't want to describe him because he does so many wonderful things. He said that I'll give $10 million to look at this, that can evil robots take over? Let's do research to make sure that it doesn't happen. But Professor Stephen Hawking himself is saying that there is a danger. So it can bring in to human race. Of course, Stephen Hawking is one of the very well-known thought leaders. So some of the questions that I would like to pose to the panelists and to the audience that can computer overtake us? Can we become digitally immortal? Can consciousness be imparted to computers? One of the issues is, should cognition-enhanced drugs be controlled? I mentioned about safety norms for food, autism increasing leaps and bounds in the US because probably our food safety norms are not proper. Do we need to start discussing that in India?
Of course.
Would modifying brain with technology lead to large-scale misuse? Because we are being brainwashed in various ways. If that brainwashing process becomes very simple, we don't know what's going to happen. But it is also possible that using this technology, we can improve our capabilities of our brain much more than what we have been doing so far. My own take is that just like mobile phones and internet have become extensions to us, I expect the brain to also get connected to larger resource, which could be others' brains or other computing resources in next 20 to 30 years. And this would give us capability unthinkable now. For example, I could borrow the brain of Einstein for 3 minutes and do the kind of thought process that was not possible. I remember when I was doing a PhD, we had access to supercomputer. Every day I used to get 3 minutes of CPU time in 24 hours. That was the only I could do. So similarly, I could borrow somebody's thing, maybe at a cost or whatever it is. But again, it will be prone to misuse, and we need to be careful about it like any other technological development. So we need to think about these things. So I will stop at this point, and then I will open the session to the panelists. I'll invite Dr. Gaurie Devi to first.
No, I think we should have the Tibetan. A few concepts of brain which need to be understood by scientists like you all is that what we thought when we were undergraduate students doing MBBS, it looked as if all the neurons which were formed at birth almost remained the same. There was no change. And the brain was a static organization. That's what we thought. But soon one realized that there are many changes which occurs, and you use the word of neuronal plasticity. What do we mean by that? That means new connections can be formed, programming can be changed. I'll just give you an example. In the brain, our body is represented in an inverted way. It's called the homunculus. Like the hand area will be somewhere here, the speech, and the leg will be there. Now, that's well represented. And then there are experiments to show that if you were to strap one or two fingers, with something and not make it work, the part of the brain which is controlling this limb, these two fingers, will become smaller in size because it's not being stimulated. The other example, the opposite example is, if you go on giving an electrical current to the same index finger, the area of the index finger increases. Okay? So what we thought was stationary pictures now is a dynamic change. Depends upon the use or misuse. I think all of you have read in the newspapers, use the brain or lose it. So what we are talking about is stimulation. These are the fundamental concepts of brain function. Stimulation versus dormancy. Now, in this, I'm just taking on a few of the issues which you have mentioned. So neuronal plasticity has to be understood in its fullest form because whatever devices you people make has to be an ever-changing thing. It cannot be a static connection. Now, I saw the example which Professor Prabhat Ranjan showed us in our Delhi neurology meeting, and it was very fascinating that a person who could not communicate for 13 years could make some signals. Now, as a neurologist, we see a large number of diseases. Just to name a few, like a stroke, which suddenly occurs, paralysis of one side of the body, and if the left half of the brain is involved, even the speech is gone. The person understands, one part of we call as Broca's area, understands what is spoken, but cannot reply because the word formation is not there. The another way of speech impairment, if it's a little part, posterior part of the brain, whatever you ask the person, they don't understand. Now, this is a great disability. How does that person communicate? the person who has what we call expressive aphasia. Aphasia means loss of speech. Expressive is you cannot communicate. Other one is called receptive, you can't even understand. So if you are trying to help, these patients are numerous in this country, following strokes, following head injuries. You know, India has the largest number of road traffic accidents. Please do not forget that. They have brain injuries, limb injuries, all parts of the body are injured. How are we going to rehabilitate them? So the concept of neurorehabilitation has to come from your side. I'm just trying to give some examples. People are aware of that. Then Stephen Hawking, you mentioned. You know, Stephen Hawking has got a disease called motor neuron disease or amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. That is my area of specialty. Last 40 years I've been working on these patients. It's a very sad disease to have. It affects the speech, the swallowing, the movements of the hands, the legs, and finally the breathing. The person usually dies between 3 to 5 years. They can't eat, they can't swallow, they can't breathe. So we give all artificial methods of sustenance. Now, Stephen Hawking could be kept alive because of your technologies. He cannot breathe on his own, so there is something which helps him, ventilation. He cannot speak, so that he does through communication through some little cheek muscle which activates. That's how, because he's a top scientist, all the great technologists went and helped him. But there are so many people in this country. I've done a population-based study. 4 per 100,000 may have ALS, and I see them almost every day. How do we tackle these patients? How does the family get help for these? Parkinson's disease, people fall down, get injured, so on. I mean, there are numerous examples. If I go on, I'll give a lecture on clinical neurology and diseases. You talked about mental retardation, how children cannot cope up with their education, with their games, the play, and so on. There are numerous ways of helping people. I'm sure somebody is going to ask about stem cells. Every patient of mine asks, can we not put stem cells in Parkinson's disease or ALS? Well, these are experimental studies being done in the animals, but so far it has not come to the clinical arena. Now, the brain is a very complex thing. We are not just talking about memory. We are talking about past experiences. Just imagine if my brain is transplanted into Prabhat Ranjan's, he carries all my childhood memories, not his. So how does he function? So while you can do heart transplant, liver transplant, kidney transplant, brain transplant is possibly, out of question. But what can be done is a tissue can be replaced. So brain is not just memory, cognition, consciousness, but it is an emotional concept which is built up from your very childhood. So be very careful when you computer scientists come in and try to help. There are a lot of safeguards which have to be built in. Many of the things which you said sounded like scientific fiction, but I'm sure they will reach the reality one day. I think I won't talk more than this. If any questions, any specific, I can address them. Leave the platform to the others.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm a neuroscientist. I'm a biologist. So the way I see the brain is that it's essentially made up of neurons, the cells, like Professor Ranjan mentioned. They are all connected to each other. They work together. And what do? In the brain, we get all the information about the world around us with our senses. There's some computation going on in the brain. Memories are formed, thoughts are there, learning is there, and there's this entity called consciousness, which comes higher than cognition, as our secretary had also said. And finally, there is an output. Output is usually some kind of a movement-related output. That's really what the brain is all about. Until recently, we didn't know what's going on. We had an input and we had an output. Now we have this new imaging technology that has shown that we can actually peer inside a brain and predict what you are thinking.
Yeah.
We can predict what you are going to do. We can actually capture your dreams. We can do a whole lot of stuff. So we are at a stage now we can start to build a model of the brain. Now this is where the problem comes. We understand how neurons function, how do they transmit information. We know little bit information about what kind of a network they form. They form a very complex network, just like an internet, but many, many times more complex. We don't understand it fully. But we have no idea, absolutely no idea, how that emergent property is emerging from the structure. We need some deep insight which can happen perhaps 5 years from now or maybe 50 years from now, I have no idea, which will give us a theory of the brain function, which you can call theory of mind, something like Einstein idea of relativity, which needs information. And then we will probably try to understand how does the brain function, how does the brain put all the information together, compute something, and gives the output. So this is what is lacking as a neuroscientist, what my goal is to actually understand how does the brain do all this. This is from a biologist point of view. I personally do not believe mind is something beyond biology, beyond brain. That's my personal belief. I may be wrong, I may be right. I do not know that. I think mind is just sum total of all the activity of the brain. Now we come to how do we challenge it with the machines, or how do the machine challenge brain? Now, most of you will remember something called a Turing test, which is more than half a century old. The idea that was put forward was that if there's a machine behind a curtain and you give an input in a very simple way and machine produces an output, and the observer cannot distinguish whether the output was given by a human being or by a machine, that means we have created a machine which is intelligent. Now that's partly true, that's not partly true, because essentially we have created a robotic device which can do a lot of things that a human brain can do, but can it think of itself? Does it have consciousness? Does it know who am I? Does it know if there is some other human being that has a brain too, right? That's a being. So that's something that is missing from the Turing test, and that is something unique about the brain, and that is something we have to worry about. In the future, if machines or computers or robots actually are able to become like that, and that's the caution that I think is being projected in various scientific forums, that we have to be worried about us. We are essentially creating a new species at that stage. Can we do that? I think we can do that. The reason we have not been able to do that is we still don't have a definition of consciousness. The definition of consciousness, once it emerges, we will be able to tell that we have created it. Okay? As far as enhancement of brain is concerned, that has been happening right from the beginning. When we train a soldier, we are programming soldier's brain. When we train a student, we learn a language, we are programming our brains. I see personally absolutely no problems with if the brain is enhanced by some other technique, some other technology. This is all technology. It might be old technology, but it is all technology. So there is no issue if we could download a book into the brain in the future. That's fine. I mean, why not? It's just a faster learning. I don't want to learn for 10 years in the school if I can do it in 5 days. I can learn a lot more during my lifetime. Can we enhance human body by the brain, by the machines? Professor Ranjan showed some brain-computer interface devices. I am myself interested in that. I am surprised that we have never met before with a common interest like this. This is something that's happening, and this is something that's going to happen. The only hindrance to that, to take it to the next level, is what I stated first. We do not still understand how does the brain code information. The day we understand that, we will have brain-controlled machines will be able to do anything that we can think of. Okay. He talked about some questions he posed. Can we brain become part of the network? And that reminds me of the species whose name I forgot that Captain Picard on Space Enterprise used to meet, where all beings of that species were interconnected with each other. So we are already interconnected with each other through internet, right? So there's just one step ahead of that. I'll just address and then I'll close so that because time is running late. Madam talked about brain transplant. I think we should not think of it as a brain transplant. I personally like to think of it as a body transplant. Being is the brain, like an eye transplant, arm transplant, hand transplant. We are essentially talking of we are preserving the brain and we are changing the body. And if you look at it that way, things become a little bit simpler for everybody, right? Face transplant has a big problem in the beginning because you're changing identity of the person. So all you're doing is replacing rest of the body too. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll request Prof. Narayanan Srinivasan to give his initial comments.
Okay. So let me kind of follow Neeraj. A couple of things I want to add that we should not forget when we talk about the brain or the mind, that the brain is in a body. We are an organism, and this organism is interacting with the environment. So as the mind or the brain has to adapt to the environment for survival, it is going to adapt to different kinds of environments differently. So one way to understand this is that to understand brain function, you would need to understand the environment as well, not just the brain only. Of course, you will realize that. So you need to understand the environment, the context in which the organism is located. That would involve physical ecological environment, as Gibson and many others have pointed out, but also would include things like culture in the context of humans. So we would need to understand the surrounding context as well to understand how the brain functions. The second point I would like to make is that I have problems thinking of brain or the mind as you give some input and it produces some output. I have a problem with it because it's essentially a feed-forward behaviorist model. So it may be easier to conceptualize it in terms of more like a feedback control system, which I think there are a lot of engineers here. So you can think of then as the fact that we have goals. All organisms have goals at different levels, and we perform various actions to achieve these goals. So you cannot understand action without understanding what the kind of goals that we have. And when you have these goals, before you perform an action, and this idea is becoming more and more popular now, the organism is going to predict the consequences of the action. And presumably you perceive and you can compute an error. People call it predictive error now. So there are these notions of predictive brain or predictive mind, depending on whichever terminology you want to use. So that might be more useful to think that, but to understand that we do need to understand the goals of the organism. Because without understanding the goals, you cannot simply look perception in isolation or actions or movement in isolation. I think that's one of the problems we have. We tend to look at these things in isolation, and partly that's creating the problem in understanding brain function as a whole. Some random comments based on the questions that were raised by Prof. Prabhat, Ranjan. One, for example, I agree with Neeraj. We are always interested in changing others' brains. Right now we are sitting here and doing it all the time. As we use language and other tools that we have evolved. But as far as specific things like cognitive enhancement for drugs, just a couple of minor points to remember is that a lot of these drug dependence curves are even in cognition. It goes back to the old Dodson law. If you increase arousal, performance increases. That usually the shape is inverted U. So if you keep on increasing then you don't keep getting benefits. At some point in time, you reach a peak and then things start falling down again. So please, we do need to keep in mind that we don't have a linear or even a increasing or even an exponential relationship. So a lot of them show inverted U relationships. That's one thing to keep in mind, whether we are going to take drugs or whether whatever we may do, that after some time things actually may start getting worse. That's part of nature itself. The second issue is that this is something that needs to be kept in mind, and we do know in certain cases, I study perception, so I have probably more examples there, is that different cognitive functions, if you increase the ability in one, it doesn't mean that the others are not affected, because these things are interconnected with each other. If you increase a cognitive ability in one process, it's going to have a negative effect on some other cognitive processes. That is, at least in terms of drugs, or certain simple, very specific process-related interventions. So we know, for example, that, if you think in terms of perception, you have to segregate. But if you make segregation very easy, we also need to integrate to perceive. So if you make one better, the other one is going to get affected. And you can show it easily in visual perception and masking experiments. But there are various other cases, so you also have to remember these cognitive processes are not separate, sitting separately, and you can boost one without affecting the other. Because they are all interconnected with each other, and the optimal performance or whatever the optimal function is something that we need to find. Exactly what will get us to perform optimally, not just the best in something. I think the word optimal is probably more clear. As far as other things concerned, as far as brain-computer interface is concerned, at least my limited understanding, I don't do it myself. I think the real challenge, as Neeraj pointed out, is that it's difficult to interpret perception, so to put it in a very simple manner. So most of the brain-machine interfaces, most of them, not all of them, focus on actions, typically getting signals from the motor cortex or electrodes typically are related to various actions like eye blinks, eye movements, and so on. Where it's easier to code them and understand them. It is very difficult to code what we are right now perceiving right now. And if we can do that, and that's the challenge. I was just reading, just throw it out, one science fiction, but this is actually a paper that was proposed. I don't know when it will become a reality or not. I was just reading this paper on what they call neural dust. Essentially, this is a proposal from a bunch of people in the University of Southern California, where essentially they are thinking of these neural dust as the miniature processors, 10 to 100 microns in size. You just sprinkle them in the brain, and then presumably they will convert electrical energy into ultrasonic. So they think that you can put an ultrasonic integrator within the skull, and then which can be used to communicate with these small sensors, as well as power them, because these small dusts also need power. So, and of course this is not a reality, but there is a proposal out there, and it was neat that people are making these power calculations and whether it is feasible or not. Today it's not feasible, but perhaps at some point in time it's feasible. But I would just come back and say that even if you are going to enhance or even understand, we probably need to look at more holistic techniques. I'm sure Geshe will talk about meditation. But we do know that certain practices like meditation actually affect multiple cognitive and emotional processes simultaneously. So perhaps such solutions which will enhance optimal functioning would probably be a better way to go if it is flexible. So I wouldn't really rely on a single drug to just improve my memory. Because there is an example, famous example, I don't know how many of you know, Luria, the Russian neuropsychologist, studied a particular Jewish population called Ashkenazi Jews, and they had exceptional memory as a group, and they have been relatively isolated, so they probably have genetic properties, things that are different. They had exceptional memory, they can remember a lot of things. However, it came with side effects. So lots of specific types of diseases, I don't remember the names anymore, probably she may know, were prevalent among them. So it's not that you get one benefit, you get hit somewhere else. You probably know the names of the diseases. So just keep that in mind, and interestingly enough, they reported, while they can remember lots of details like phone number types details, they had huge problems with face perception. Because they thought one face is kind of merging with other faces. They are not able to separate it out because they are remembering everything. So it's all getting mixed up. So I will stop here.
Thank you.
Well, the Ashkenazi Jews are a very select group of people. There's a lot of inbreeding within them. So there are large number of genetic disorders within them. You see, we are also told, I'm sure somebody, if you try to remember too much, it's unnecessary. It's important to forget some things so that, after all, the storage capacity of the brain, we can say unlimited. But even there must be some level where you cannot. So if you're going to forget some things, it's good. Particularly if you forget unpleasant experiences of your life, you're much better emotionally and psychologically. You agree, sir? Yeah, thank you. I think as the questions come, we'll talk more.
So thank you, Geshe. I will request you to now you give your comments.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Prabhat, Ranjan ji, and all the panelists here, and respected the Secretary of TIFAC, and all the observers here. So basically, I have a few points to make. One, why do we have to explore whether or not there is a mind which is different from the brain? Rather than starting by saying that, oh, there should be the mind should be different from the brain. Oh, no, the brain is the mind. In the first place, why do we have to explore that? This is a question. And if there is no specific purpose, reason, then we can just forget about studying about mind. Just study brain and that's it. But in actuality, if we think of, say, what Charles Darwin's position, his discovery, I wouldn't say discovery, his hypothesis. One, that human beings, we evolved, our brains evolved, and now we are gifted with the instinct of anger, attachment, and so forth. And this instinct, which we are gifted with through millions of years of evolution, that allows us to dispel or expel what is harmful to you, and the attachment or desire, which is going to be the equipment to acquire what you want. So this is how we live. This is Charles Darwin's hypothesis. In case, if the world follows this hypothesis, believing that this is the reality, what is the consequence? If there is no bad consequence, well, then what is fine. There's nothing wrong in it. But imagine, according to this hypothesis, anger is something which we cannot eliminate because this is instinct. If this is correct, and if this is what everyone believes, then people will not strive to eliminate anger. Then without striving to eliminate anger, this anger will give rise to hatred, and the hatred will give rise to terrorism. And this terrorism is the cause of the disaster now. So imagine what the President of India said. There is no good terrorism, bad terrorism. All terrorism is bad terrorism. And then he cited all these examples of the recent terrorism. Just imagine all these things. So behind all these intellectual discussions, if we are not careful, then there's a serious repercussions in the humanity. There's a crisis which are following that. So therefore, this issue, whether or not there's a mind which is different from the brain, this is a huge and very important topic to be discussed. One. Now the next question. Now, what is the reality? Whether or not there's a mind which is different from the brain. I read Eric Kandel's book, In Search of Memory. Eric Kandel, who is Nobel laureate in 2004 in physiology.
Great neuroscientist.
He put forth two hypotheses. He said, just in the opening passage of the book, according to the current neuroscientists, hypothesis 1, there is no mind, it's just a brain. Hypothesis 2, there is mind, but it's the emergent property of the brain. So these are the two hypotheses which he set forth in the opening passage of his book. Now the next question, whether or not there is a mind which is different from the brain, or whether or not our mind or the brain, what we call as the mind, whatever, whether the anger and the negative emotions which the Dr. M. Gaurie Devi so beautifully mentioned, the emotional world, whether these emotions such as hatred, anger, jealousy and so forth, are they something instinct or inherent, developed over the last millions of years in the human realm? These are all the questions. So that is a huge discussion, and I like to share as many points on this, but then I simply want to restrain myself with this to jump to the next point. The next point is I personally believe, and this is my take, that science is such a rigorous system. Science is such a rigorous system. Physics, chemistry, biology, and nowadays particularly neuroscience, they are such a rigorous system. And this system, it has its own incredible strength and beauty. We must not dilute that by mixing with other disciplines. What I'm saying here is that while neuroscience is so deep an inquiry into the human brain, it should not be mixed with physics and chemistry. It should not be mixed with spirituality. At the same time, it doesn't mean that neuroscience is the whole story of the humanity. Neuroscience is one story of the humanity. Because the reality, the human beings, as all the panelists mentioned, is such a complex system. It's not just a simple system. It's a very complex system. So complex that the biology is involved, chemistry, the chemical reactions are involved, then the physics, the elemental particles involved. Every complexities are there. As such, it is very important to keep in mind what is known as the three divisions of reality. Three divisions of reality. One is the evident phenomena, and the other one is the obscured phenomena, and the third one is a very obscured phenomena. Three. And all these three, we the human beings, we are constituted of all these three complexities, the complexity of the evident phenomena, the obscure phenomena, and very hidden, very obscure phenomena. So what is it constituted of the evident phenomena? Evident phenomena is those things which we can measure, which we can easily see, we can quantify them by means of the modern technology. All these things, they fall under the category of the evident phenomena. So what science, the present day science is doing, is tackling the first phenomena, the evident phenomena. And I would very much, this is my very strong belief that the modern science should be confined to that for the time being, with this evident phenomena. And yet, as I said earlier, that the human beings, it is not just this, constituted of this evident phenomenon. It has so much complexities there. Hidden phenomena is also there, hidden phenomena or obscure phenomena. Obscure phenomena, for example, how with quantum physics, how the electrons behave. if you are to measure, quantitatively measure, as to what is the velocity of the electron, what is the position of the electron at what particular time, it has to be considered only in relation to the observer. So it's the observer-observed relationship. So that plays such an important role. So this is not something that simply by looking through the machines, we can see things. So it must be, the observer should be brought in. So look, physics has now coming into a paradigm shift. We see a paradigm shift in physics happening. Now the next point is that this issue of the mind, and this issue of the identity, the self-identity, identity as a self, I. So we see that each one of us, if you're not interested in this talk, you will simply leave. If you're very interested, you will stay till the end. What determines that? There's a sense of I. This sense of I determines whether you are to stay here, whether you to go, whether you are to grab a chocolate, whether you grab alcohol, whatever. So this sense of I plays a very important role. At the same time, if you reduce the sense of I to this just physical, small structure, brain, then it's very dangerous, very dangerous. So therefore, to make it very short, out of the three kinds of the phenomena in which everything falls into, evident phenomena, then the slightly obscure phenomena, and the very obscure phenomena. Of the three, science as of now is dealing with the first one, mainly the first one, right? So, whereas we should not forget the second and the third one. If you forget these two, then it may take us to very serious repercussions. The next point that I'd like to share with you here is that then what exactly is mind? This is a question which had been in the realm of mystery for the last many millennia. What is mind? This question. Okay, so the mind, we are not supposed to think of something which is something mystical up there which we don't understand. To make it very simple, mind. Say for example, let's all think of India Gate now. Let's all think of India Gate. India Gate is not there, but you could sense, you could imagine India Gate in your mind. And then, as our here the speaker Professor Neeraj Jain, he said, now we can detect what you're thinking. Initially, how did this happen? How was it evolved to this stage of complexity where the scientists are able to detect what you're thinking? Initially, you may be thinking about India Gate, and then you are put in the fMRI scan. So there, the scientists could see the brain waves in the computer, but you cannot see the brain waves. You have the first-hand experience of what you are thinking. Oh, I'm thinking of India Gate. You know the mental process, you don't see the brain process. The scientists see the brain process, the scientists don't see the mental process. And then the scientists would ask you, what are you thinking? I'm thinking of India Gate. Okay, with this brain wave, it corresponds to India Gate. So this is how it started. So therefore now, we may say, oh, now you are thinking of apple. Or now you may think of your mother, right? So this all started by initially corresponding with what you are thinking and what the brain waves that we could see on the screen, right? So we see that what you are experiencing, which the scientists cannot read, this is known as mind. What you are experiencing, what the scientists cannot see, is mind. What you cannot see, what the scientists will see, is the brain. This is the distinction, right? Now, in this regard, the next question arises. Now, how can we say that whether or not this mind is the emergent property of the brain? This is the next question. Whether or not the mind is the emergent property of the brain. We should not begin by saying that, oh, the mind is not the emergent property of the brain. The mind is different. No, we should not start with this. So, there must be reasons, rationalities, very convincing rationalities, to feel that the mind is indeed distinct from the brain. Then we see that, oh, because that the mind is so distant from the brain, and the brain which is so limited in the physical nature, so the mind, on the other hand, it can have incredible potential to grow, right? So, as our Dr. M. Gaurie, Devi said, sometimes it is good to forget things, right? So, the thing is that here, if you are, as here, the secretary of TIFAC said, the wisdom. If you develop the wisdom, then more the knowledge that you have, better you are in a position to help others, to tackle situations. Say, if you have so many things, and then these thoughts, bad memories, they give rise to pain in you. Then because of this, then next time somebody, because of recollection of the past, bad experiences, then the person is in pain and trauma, then you can empathize with the person. Whereas if you forget it, then you have no pain, and then when the other person is going through traumatic experience, you cannot empathize. So here the wisdom plays an important role. Wisdom plays a very important role. Okay, so then now the brain and the mind. So I can't really go into detail as to how I have for the last 30-something years explored into whether or not the mind is different from the brain. So now one very quick summary which I like to make here is that the physical brain and the mind, one of the great Buddhist logician and epistemologist and a psychologist, Acharya Dharmakirti, what he said was that the brain and the mind, these two are very closely connected. These two are mutually dependent. When you affect the brain, it can affect the mind. When you affect the mind, it can affect the brain. This is nowadays, at one point in time, say like 20, 30 years ago, there was a belief amongst the neuroscientists that it's not a mutuality, it's a linear. Whether you affect the brain and the mind is affected, that's it. Not that the mind is affected and the brain is affected. That one is, the reverse is not there in the 20, 30 years back in time. Now the scientists, with the research happening in America, this is what is being discovered. This is what is being talked more. It's not just the linear fashion where you affect the brain and the mind is affected. That is for sure happening. At the same time, you affect the mind and the brain is affected. With meditation, your brain is affected and the new neuronal circuits and synapses, very stable synaptic connections are being created because of this, long-term meditations and so forth. So affecting the mind can affect the physical brain. So this is what is being discovered nowadays. Then, so from that point of view, what I like to share with you is that with the brain and the mind relationship, the mind, in the Buddhist psychology, there is explanation of how the mind has so many layers. What we are experiencing now is very gross. And then when we sleep, it becomes subtler. And then when we faint, it becomes even subtler. At the time of death, it becomes even subtler. So there's so much diversity, variance in subtlety. Now, interestingly, as the mind becomes more and more subtler, as the mind becomes more and more subtler, it becomes more and more independent of the physical brain. This is one thing that we need to know. As the mind becomes subtler and subtler, it becomes more and more independent from the brain. So there are techniques and methods by which to deliberately make your mind subtler. And then you could feel that your mind is becoming independent of the physical brain. And then about this last point, what can we download everything, all things on a brain? Okay. And then can you take one, consume one, tablet?
Pills.
One pill, compassion pill, and you become very compassionate like Dalai Lama. Or you take the pill for the physics, you become the next Albert Einstein, right? His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, jokingly said, well, I remember that, I think in the West, in America, he said that, if that is possible, I will be the first person to sign up to buy this pill. This is what His Holiness jokingly said, right? So what I'm saying is that the distinction between the pills, taking the pill and then the person, become very compassionate, very possible. At the same time, there's a distinction. With the pills, as long as the effect is there, the person feels compassionate and tender, soft. The moment the pill is gone, then the person goes back to the same rudeness,
Correct.
cruelness. Whereas this change happening through mental practice, meditation, that experience is very stable and it stays. Thank you.
Now we open the floor for discussion. That's what we wanted. So please. Shamrud.
I want to ask Dr. Devi, what should be the role of family members towards, what should be the role of family members towards a person who is shy in socializing, who doesn't want to interact? Shy in socializing.
Shy in socializing.
Who wants to interact with other people, who wants to remain alone. And what should be done to transform him so that his behavior becomes normal?
Well, firstly, one has to find out the cause of shyness. It could be just a behavior, or it could reflect a disease like a depression. So, firstly, one should consult a psychiatrist or a psychologist and find out the reasons for this isolation. One wants to be alone, not go out. If it is just a personality pattern, then it can be changed through counseling by a psychologist, and the parents are taught how to do it. But firstly, we must recognize whether it is a routine behavior pattern or it's a part of a disease, a mental disease. I think that's important.
Thank you.
What you said, Mr. Damdul, is then the mind the soul? And secondly, mind drives the brain or brain drives the
Both ways.
mind?
Both ways.
Thank you. Whether or not the mind is the soul, this is a very serious question. I like to make it very simple, particularly in discussion like this or in the academic area. So there, I always encourage people to, tackle those things which is within the bound, which is within your ability to convince others of the existence of that phenomenon. So the mind, as I said earlier, is, say you think of India Gate, you're thinking of it. So that agent with which you are aware that I'm thinking of, this is known as mind. And some people, they think that thing, the agent which thinks, this is a mind, this is soul. Some people, they interpret it this way. So if this is the case, then I would say mind and soul, these two are the same. Whereas others, they may not interpret it this way. Soul is something which is different from the mind. Soul is something which we cannot experience. Some philosophers, they explain it like this. If that is the case, then the mind and soul, these two are different, and what we are discussing here is the mind. Then the next one, whether or not the mind drives, whether it is the mind which drives the brain or the brain which drives the mind. So these two are more, as I said, a mutuality of driving. There's a mutuality of dependence. At times, the brain can drive the mind. So, for example, this is a typical example given there in the Buddhist psychology. Say when there is a brain damage, then the person can lose the speech. The person can, even the sense of empathy disappears at times, and you lose your language. You may not lose your speech, but then you may lose your language. These things happen. So this is how the brain drives the mind. At times there are mind which drives the brain. So through deliberate thinking, not through physical changing of the brain, but deliberate thinking, new synaptic connections are created. Very stable new synaptic connections created. And the indication of that is twofold. One, physically you can diagnose that. And then number two, you can see that at times, without any effort, you can spontaneously invoke those experiences. Those experiences, which are clear indication that some kind of stable change in the brain, synaptic, connection has occurred. Yeah. So it's mutuality.
The question was very good and thought-stimulating. It's both ways. As a doctor, I will tell you the examples. The concept of psychoneuroimmunology, the word, has evolved over the time. Our Ayurvedic physicians recognized long ago the deep interaction between the mind and the body, mind, brain, and body. But I think the modern doctors like us, we didn't recognize it for many years. Now we know that if a person is agitated, angry, over the time, the same personality continues, you can check the blood pressures at different times. The blood pressure will rise. That's part of the thing. Or your bowel movements may be faster, called irritable bowel syndrome. One could get headache, one could get pains. That is how the mind influences the brain to various mechanisms, and the brain affects the heart, bowel, etc. Okay, that's quite easy. Now, the brain affecting the mind, there are numerous examples both in the history of neurosciences and what we see. If you damage a particular area of the brain called the hippocampus, your memories of recent memory goes, but the old memory may remain. The behavior may change. The famous example of Brenda Milner, who was a neuropsychologist at the Montreal Neurological Institute, she saw a patient who had a road traffic injury. He was in US and she was called from Montreal because she was a fantastic neuropsychologist. This man was an engineer. He had injury on both the sides. I think he had epilepsy and the surgery was done. He would continue to be active. He could draw the diagrams, etc. But when his attention was drawn, let's say a telephone rang, he would answer that. When he came back to his drawing, everything is forgotten. The doctors who were coming to see him every day, he couldn't recognize them. He will say, "Who are you?" They introduce again and again. So here, a brain lesion is changing the memory, the thinking process. There are numerous examples. After head injuries, I'm sure any of your people who are around you, if they have suffered from a severe head injury, there are a lot of behavior changes. And their thinking process is affected, okay? So it is both ways. I mean, he has talked in a higher plane of philosophy. I'm talking in a more of a daily things what we see. It is both ways.
Just one second, one more
just
comment.
one comment I'll give. That's a very thought-provoking thing, and I'll bring it down further than what her level is. So, in a way, as a biologist, I think actually, mind does not exist. It's all brain. Okay?
He thinks it's all brain.
In future, both will probably merge together. We as a human being, that includes me who's a neuroscientist who wants to know everything about the brain, I cling to the notion of mind because that gives me something as myself bigger than what we call my Nashwar Sharir or whatever you want to call it. So I want to think of it as a bigger than this body. And that's why I cling on to this notion of mind. So that's one possibility. And today we don't have answer to that. Maybe at some point in the future we'll have answer to that. And that's one of the things that you're saying why we talk about mind, because we want to know who am I. And am I better than my brain? Something like that.
Ajit ji, still.
I would like to add here that it's neither brain nor mind. It's the diet which you take. That has a very big role to play.
It is what?
Diet.
Diet.
Food. The quality of the food.
See what? Ajit ji, Ajit ji, you were asking.
I have one more question with Dorji, Mr. Dorji, that how will you define meditation?
Very good. Meditation. In a strict sense and in a loose sense. In a loose sense, it is habituating your mind on a particular object. Habituating your mind on a particular object by increasing the power of mindfulness and introspection. Habituating your mind on a particular object by increasing the power of introspection and mindfulness, two things. In a strict sense, habituating your mind on a virtuous object, which makes your mind happier. Which would be, say for example, how to destroy the other person. You know, you may be thinking so much severe on that. With mindfulness and introspection, so that is a form of meditation, but it's a destructive meditation. Whereas in a strict sense, meditation is meant to make you happy, right? So, meditation in a strict sense is defined as habituating one's mind on a virtuous object, which makes your mind more virtuous and more happy by increasing the power of introspection and mindfulness. Thank you.
Kumar, founder Khushigram, and my question is on ethics, spirituality, and science together. The discussion that we had on brain-mind control and who will control the brains or minds, and would it be like the richer people or the stronger people controlling the brains, and would it lead to disaster, destruction, and eventually destruction of the entire earth or our entire system? So, is it like, can we use meditation or like yoga? World International Yoga Day is now there from this year. So better diet in terms of, or that thinking inculcated during early schooling, that education, that values, where you think of others, when you think of betterment of others and good things together in the system. Through science, of course science is there, so when we teach science, we teach of specific details of all these things. So how will you connect all these?
I'll just answer part of this thing when you talk of ethical questions or something like that. That's a very serious problem. If we can actually find out that this 100 neurons or 1000 neurons code for an information which is your love for your mother or my love for my mother, for example, and if we stimulate them, you start loving. If you destroy that, you stop loving, and experiments like that are being done. Actually creates a very serious neuroethological problem at two levels. One, should we even be studying? That's for society to decide, right? We are curious, we will keep on studying. But if society as a whole can somehow put a lid to it, maybe it can, but it will have some negative consequences in terms of progress towards curing mental diseases and things like that. The second question is, how do you use that knowledge? Now, there's never going to be an answer to that in the way the society exists today. There's always a difference in the power. There's always a difference in the influence of one human being over the other. And obviously, eventually, powerful will end up using it to their benefit. That's something that society has to decide. But that's how I see it. And it's scary thought, actually.
I think I understood the way you said yoga and what it does, and can we do it from childhood. Is that what you said? You see, if you take the Ashtanga yoga, there are 8 steps of yoga, which includes what is called dinacharya, the day, the time you get up, the way what you do, what you eat, how do you yoga, meditation, dhyana, and all that. If all that is inculcated, obviously you will develop a human being, which he is mentioning, a stable person who is not moved too much, not too much anger, not too much of sorrow, that kind of a thing. And you're right, in Karnataka, I mean, I was in NIMHANS for 25 years. In Karnataka, in all the schools, they introduced yoga at a particular age. So I think that's why I think the Prime Minister has even talked about Yoga Day and yoga should be taught. But it's not just physical, the way it is popularized in the West, it's all doing what? Power yoga and some yoga. I think this is all more merchandise rather than anything else. The true spirit of yoga has to be Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga, 8 steps of yoga, which I've learned actually.
Lucy.
At the end of
Have you seen this movie? You heard about it? Science fiction.
Will it be possible, or can we be able to, whatever it was, like, can we be able to realize or feel or get into this thing, like what actually will happen if we start using more and more of our percentage of the brain?
Okay. To make it very quick, again, it goes back to the same point, like what the Secretary of TIFAC said earlier. You use your brain 100%. Say, because of this, you know every atom of the universe, how the atoms they are vibrating, every movement of your mind, what is going to happen in the future, your death, tomorrow, all these things. Then you're so scared, right? Then, oh, tomorrow is my mother's death. Day after tomorrow is my father's death. Then you are in the world of chaos, and But this is a clear indication of lack of wisdom, right? Without wisdom, the knowledge can be very destructive to yourself. With wisdom, the knowledge can be extremely helpful, because you know that, say, your mother is dying tomorrow. Because of this knowledge, 100% uses your brain. And then if you have a wisdom, you will. There are 24 hours left with your mother. You will be exceptionally kind to her. And you can even console her as to how to tackle her death in a very skillful ways. Whereas if you don't have this wisdom, then you become paranoid, and then you will end up yourself in the hospital, right? And the other point about the diet, not the mind, not the brain, but the diet, right? So this also we need to think very seriously, right? The richest person, they might have in the 5-star hotels, they might have the best of the diets, but they can be the worst of the unhappy person. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So these of the richest people, they have dietitians. What actually your body needs, they are so concerned about that, and they are so unhappy. They have to depend on sleeping pills, tranquilizers. They have the best of the diet, with the dietitians, best of the dietitians there, right? So this does not make you the good person, a happy person. So there's something more. Thank you.
The Ayurvedic principle says there's 3 types of diets: the tamasic, the rajasic, and sattvic. Okay, it depends upon what you eat. Your personality is dependent on diet. So Ayurveda strongly recommends what type of diet. Tamasic are very angry, emotional. Rajasic are supposed to be intellectual. Sattvic are more religious, philosophers like him. So these are the 3 levels which at least Ayurveda discusses.
Just one second. Just to make a quick point, I don't think there's a scientific evidence that we use 20% of our brain. Brain is highly energy consuming organ. It consumes 20% of total calories that our body uses. Evolution would not let us survive with the entire brain if we were using only 20% of the brain. We would have had only 20% of the brain. So this is a myth actually. Scientifically it's a myth.
You have left one of the aspects of mind. Question is very simple. Do you think that if there is only one mind, it will develop? Or mind can only develop with interactions with other minds? So development of mind is a social process, is a combined process, or can we talk about one mind and all the properties of one mind only? My second question is that what is about the content of mind? How it gets related to the world?
As far as the content of the mind, that is in terms of, that is what normally we call perception, right? The way we interact with the world, we perceive what is out there, we get knowledge about the world. So, and that content will differ depending on various factors. Different organisms gather different kinds of knowledge about the world. The bats presumably have a kind of knowledge that definitely we do not have because their perceptual systems are completely different. So that the content would depend on the kinds of perceptual and motor systems.
Can we just go back to the first point which you said, Dr. Srinivasan?
Yeah.
The first point which you said.
Yes.
I think, when in terms of you said it earlier, like, we are talking about the neural, you can make some changes in the neural, one of the neurons. So there we are talking about the individual, right?
Sure.
The individual brain.
Yeah, but the neurons change depending upon the world that it is seeing or experiencing, and the world consists of other human beings.
No. The question is, like, like the brain enhancement kind of techniques which you use, and you are deliberately, let's say, making some neuron more, some faculty is being improved, and you said there some other faculty may become casualty. So can you think about it in a collective fashion, like go beyond the individual neural network and look at it collectively? Maybe we should have a social scientist to answer, but probably you can throw some light on it. I think you are touching upon that point in some fashion.
I don't know if I can answer this question at all. I'm really not sure, because most of the drugs or intervention techniques are very specific to specific mental processes, or neural processes, or specific neural mechanisms. So of course there are these things like meditation which are presumably holistic and affect a lot. So we think that that could be the kind of thing that you might be looking for. But we don't have a final answer, because that depends on, again, what kind of goals you have.
Comment with an implicit question. Hi, so I'd like to move back to the topic of the discussion, race between mind and machine. And I would like to thank Damdul ji for giving spiritual perspectives which are almost in the same language of systems theory and history and philosophy of science. And it essentially boiled down to a race between hypotheses rather than a race between mind and machine. And ideas like a system is the sum of parts are belonging to the 19th and 20th century. I mean, history and philosophy of science have progressed too much to, make us be a bit more reflexive when we are constructing hypotheses. For example, a theory of waste emerged after thermodynamics and modern economics. So can we be a bit more reflexive in framing our hypothesis of what this race between mind and machine is, and be sensitive to different levels of uncertainties, because uncertainties are not just epistemic, they can be ontological, they can be cosmological, you may never know. So a bit amount of reflexivity won't hurt, and this is perhaps a part of the larger debates on artificial intelligence, that there's a race
Please make it short.
Yes, something very simple. You talk about neuroplasticity of the brain as well as molding the brain. So this is for you, Dr. Gaurie.
Yeah.
There is a therapy called neurofeedback therapy which is happening in Bangalore. I want to know the effects of this therapy versus medication. And also something which Dr. Ranjan touched upon the last time I met him was binaural beats. So I want to know the effects of this versus medication, how it's affecting the brain. Does it really last, or like medication, it'll last as long as the medication's taken, or for a shorter period of time, or do we need to go back to the therapy time and again for it to be more sustainable?
I think
There is a physical brain and there is mind, and when it is subtler, then it can go away from it. Whereas Neeraj told that at some point of time, maybe mind and brain can come at one point, which should not be the case, I would say like that, because it is not the notes where music comes from, it is the space in between the two notes where the interplay will give you different tunes at different point of time. So that is one question to you, is whether where is intellect? Because we have used the word brain, we have used the word mind, but TIFAC is using working with intellectual property.
Intellectual property.
And there, Ranjan has given us some notes like definitions where it is told that some of the thing which comes from brain intellect having away, so there can be some patriotic effect in between, and that is where the intellect will break. So I am very much convinced with that Indian, you can say, sub-race who are very much business-minded. I would like to know from you why some people are more business-minded and
Let the questions come first. Okay?
Dinner time.
Yeah, go ahead, I think you can. Go. Yeah, go ahead.
In all these deliberations, one word is missing. We are not talking about art.
Oh, right.
We say, I feel it by my brain, my mind, my heart. My heart goes out to that person. Which is that part of the way does that fit in?
Yeah.
The whole thing, consciousness, that perception, or intellect. Where does the heart come and does it have any role to play? That's my
Okay, let him ask his question.
I will answer that.
Good evening. My name is Dr. H. Purushottam. I am working as a chairman and managing director of NRDC, the National Research Development Corporation. We are in the era of intellectual property rights. And India has, I think, taken a lead in digitizing the traditional knowledge digital library. In the similar way, whether India can take a lead in digitizing the traditional wisdom so that it helps the next generations, the future generations, and the knowledge of our rishis and our saints, which they have created on this earth, probably can be protected, and India can take a lead in that. This is what I think Dr. Prabhat Ranjan himself is an expert in this area. I request probably TIFAC in association with many other labs or scientists who are working in this area, probably can take a lead, and with the guidance and help of our Secretary DST, who is also philosophically inclined, probably I think we can get a boost and take this initiative so that future generations gets benefit out of our efforts.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, we've run out of time, so we'll actually try to stop the session and go over because a lot of people are leaving also. But in Technology Vision 2035 also we are talking of this aspect, so we'll cover that. But let me stop this because there's so much interesting. But what I promised you, we'll come back. We'll come back with a longer session which we have more time to explore because such an interesting thing. We're just warming up actually, and we could go on for hours. But we thought it's a glimpse only. We'll follow it up and we'll have a bigger time.
Thanks a lot to all the dignitaries. And here I just want to share one scripture from Upanishad which says, Atmaiv Atmano Bandhu Atmaiv Ripuratmana. Our own mind is our best friend and our own mind is our worst enemy.
Very good.
So before we conclude this session, I would like to request our Executive Director, Dr. Prabhat Ranjan, to please felicitate our dignitaries with memento.
So this memento actually is the brain. Of course, we could have done individual brains also if we had MRI scan. using 3D printing, so actually it can be made individual. So it's using 3D printing, which we have been trying to promote. So it's customized to individual needs. We can make customized individual brains also, but right now it's a common brain that we have used. And what we are seeing is that actually you can make molds very cheaply. Like this, whatever cost was there for making one, we can make a mold and then you copy it. But we want to individualize, so each one of them has a different name written on this. So please bring.
Ladies and gentlemen, please have it on.
Just your name. Thank you. Yes, thank you. You got an LED lamp also. Be careful that I don't do others.
So I hope it's the feminine brain, and I don't know where the mind is then.
Thank you, all the dignitaries. And now I would like to invite on stage our registrar, Mr. Rishipal Singh, for signing off this ceremony with vote of thanks. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
It's beautifully done.
Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Anil Kakotkar Sahab, Secretary DST, Professor Ashutosh Sharma Sahab, respected dignitaries, media persons, and my colleagues. It is a privilege and pleasure for me to render vote of thanks to all the speakers and guests for gracing this occasion of 28th Foundation Day. It was indeed a pleasure to witness a thought-provoking panel discussion on future brain. My heartfelt thanks to all the panelists, Dr. Gaurie Devi, Professor Neeraj Jain, Professor Narayanan Srinivasan, Ven.Geshe, Dorji, Damdul, and our Executive Director, Professor Prabhat Ranjan sir. I express my sincere thanks to our Honorable Chairman, Dr. Anil Kakotkar, for TIFAC Day lecture. Special thanks to the children from National Association for Blind New Delhi, who rendered beautiful Vandana, and also would like to express my thanks to Professor Gaurie, under whose guidance we could witness the electronic lamp lighting ceremony. The successful culmination of this program is the result of guidance of our Executive Director, Professor Prabhat Ranjan. And I would like to conclude my vote of thanks by conveying my heartiest thanks to the team who worked day and night to make this event so wonderful. Thanks to all once again, and now humbly inviting for you the dinner. Thank you very much.